Do you believe in chivalry, or do you believe that might always makes right? Are you willing to die for your honor? Will you fight to rid the world of injustice, or use clout and power to take advantage of those beneath you? Pendragon is a role-playing game set in King Arthur's Britain. You take on the role of knight and overcome mythical monsters, rival knights, and other wondrous challenges in search of glory. The Pendragon starter set presents a world of great adventure. This is the time of the sword and the stone, of the boy king and Merlin and their struggles against those who would seize the crown for themselves, and of the flowering of chivalry. This is a time of desperate battles, dark portents, enchanted forests, pride, and self-indulgence. This is a review of the Pendragon starter set. Let's dive in. So here we have the Pendragon 6th edition starter set from Chaosium. This was published back in 2023. So what exactly is in this box? Well, we have some dice. We have like 6d6 and a d20, which is what you're going to be rolling a majority of. This is a roll under game. There's a what's in this box pamphlet, and on the other side is an ad for Rune Quest, which is actually pretty sweet. We'll get to that in a couple weeks. There are 3 different books. So book 1 is The Adventure of the Sword in the Stone. This is a solo quest adventure. We have book 2, The Fabled Realm. So this has all of the rules and setting information. And then we have book 3, which has the Sword Campaign, which is an introductory campaign for new players and GMs. There are 4 different appendices, which are additional rules for when you're ready to play the game beyond the adventure presented in this book, and there are multiple pages of each, so I'm supposing that you're supposed to give these out to your players, which is actually really nice. There are battle cards, which you'll be making use of in the actual adventure. These are pretty much like, I believe, NPCs and different victory conditions. And then we have the 8 pre-generated characters like Sir Clarion. And by the way, these books are really interesting. It's pretty sweet. So on one side, you've actually got the picture, but then it opens up into like this, I don't even know what you would call it. It's like a little pamphlet that's the size of a book. And I actually kind of like that. That's really interesting. It almost makes me want to like have a, my own player screen. So if the GM can get his own screen, then now my players have their own screen and the GM can just look at the portraits or something. But for the actual player knights, we have Sir Clarion, Sir Ivrane, Dame Linnell, Sir Avaloc, Dame Tamura, Cadwallon, Dame Quinhild, and Sir Asterius. Book 1, The Adventure of the Sword in the Stone. This is a solo quest, a choose-your-own adventure, if you will. This is meant to serve as an introduction to gameplay, and it kind of is on a very basic level. It also sets up events in the first scenario of Book 3. You play this solo game as a child. You get to choose a name and a gender, as well as values for your traits and your skills. You are in the service of an aging knight named Sir Ector, as a page. The adventure has you choosing from a set of actions and proceeding to the next number. Sometimes there are no actions and you are pointed to the next point after that. From what I've gathered, this is more of an introduction to setting and how knights are supposed to act. You are at times given choices on whether to act honorably or less honorably so. It should be mentioned that while you are playing through this adventure as your character, you are actually part of Arthur's story as he claims the sword in the stone. At the very end of the adventure, you get points based on the actions you took in the story. Hopefully, you've been keeping tabs on everything you did. And you get a rank from Esquire to Knight of the Round Table, which is pretty cool and adds a little bit of replayability if you want to play through it again with different stats or different choices, and hopefully some better rolls as well. Book 2, The Fabled Realm, is where you're going to have the rules and the setting. We start with a very brief overview of the world of Greg Stafford's Arthurian world and how chivalrous knights behave, but also how they fit within the hierarchy of a kingdom. This introduction is absolutely a necessary read if you do not know a lot about knights historically. So how exactly do we play the game? Well, dice rolls in the game are made using a d20. This is a roll under game. There are two types of resolutions. We have unopposed roles and opposed roles. As is suggested, unopposed roles are when a character is not being contested by another character or NPC. A success occurs when the die roll is less than the value of the statistic being tested. So there are four types of resolutions. A success, a critical success, is when a die roll exactly matches the statistic value. There's a failure, and then there's a fumble, which occurs whenever a character rolls a natural 20, unless the statistic value is 20, in which case a result of 20 becomes a critical success. A statistic value of 20, by the way, has no chance of a fumble, so I guess that's your way of getting good. Opposed rolls happen when a character needs to roll against the outcome of another roll. Unlike unopposed rolls, results aren't just success or failure, but can also result in a tie or partial success. So we have winner. If you roll equal to or less than your statistic value and higher than the roll of your opponent, then you are the winner of an opposed resolution. If you roll greater than your statistic value, you are the loser. Partial success occurs when a roll is successful and lower than the opponent's roll. A tie occurs when opponents both fail or succeed the roll exactly the same number. A character has 5 different characteristics: size, dexterity, strength, constitution, and appeal. Now, size measures a character's relative height and weight compared to others. It is also the threshold value for the derived characteristic called knockdown. Dexterity measures a character's agility and nimbleness. Strength measures a character's physical power and their ability to exert force or pressure on an object. Constitution measures health and vitality. It's also important in determining how much of a beating you can take and how quickly you recover. Appeal measures the character's natural charm, presence, and physical attractiveness. Traits and passions are the statistics that depict personality. In a way, it helps guide role-playing, providing players with a guideline on how their knights should act. This makes something that should be narrative gameplay into a mechanical one, and I'm not really a big fan of this. Traits represent a character's personality. They define a character's feelings and govern behavior. A character may claim to believe whatever they wish, but claims do not affect behavior. For instance, anyone can say, "I am the bravest knight alive," but if they run away from a confrontation, then they reveal their true quality, their cowardly trait. All characters have 13 opposed trait pairs. The sum of each trait pair must always equal 20. When one trait increases, the opposite decreases by the same amount in an endless tug of war between virtue and vice. During a scenario, events may occur that cause a character to act one way or another, or the game master may ask for or mandate a roll against an appropriate trait. Most of the time, though, the player simply states what they want their character to do and they do it, possibly receiving an experience check from the game master. Sometimes, though, ingrained behavior takes precedence over conscious intent. We have all experienced doing something without thinking, and a trait roll duplicates that behavior. If the character has normal traits, they may roll them in any order they wish. On the contrary, characters must always roll famous or exalted traits first. These are the ones that have a higher value. And an unmodified exalted trait never fails. Most trait rolls help in deciding a character's behavior. Normal traits offer the most freedom of action. The Game Master may always request a normal trait roll to determine a player knight's behavior. The player chooses which side of the trait pair to test first, and their player knight behaves accordingly to the result. Some tests are more straightforward, such as an indulgent roll to see if a character becomes drunk at a feast. Often, as in the case of intoxication, the consequences for failure are spelled out in the rules or scenario. In terms of the traits themselves, we have things like chaste and lustful, energetic and lazy, forgiving and vengeful, generous and selfish, honest and deceitful, just and arbitrary, merciful and cruel, modest and proud, prudent and reckless, spiritual and worldly, temperate and indulgent, trusting and suspicious, valorous and cowardly. And then we have religious traits. Some of the traits are also religious. Depending on what your character's religion is, you will have certain traits that your character holds value to. Passions grant temporary modifiers to skills and traits, but never to characteristics or other passions. Passions exist on a spectrum from low to high. A passion does not have a high value to be meaningful, though. A lower value passion still indicates strong feelings. Like traits, passions have 4 levels as well: unsung, normal, famous, and exalted. Invoking a passion is an excellent way to add excitement to a scenario, for it can result in superhuman actions. A successful passion roll inspires or impassions the player knight, giving them a big temporary bonus to one of their skills or traits. However, passion rolls can also be risky. A failure or fumble may subject a knight to several unpleasant states of mind, including melancholy and madness. A character may roll to provoke any given passion once per day, but the game master can call for a passion roll at any time. While passions are unopposed rolls, there are different effects that can happen depending on the results. So we can have impassioned, a temporary +10 bonus to a single skill or trait chosen by the player. Inspired, a temporary +5 bonus to a single skill or trait chosen by the player. A passion crisis, which is bad, or you can lose 1 point from the passion. A character suffering a passion crisis must make an unopposed roll against a passion that triggered the crisis, applying any of the modifiers given below to check if the character suffers an affliction. So if the character failed their task while inspired, they get +0. If they failed their task while impassioned, they get +5. If they are currently inspired by the passion, +5. The cause of the passion crisis is due to the character's own actions or inactions, it's +10. And the character is currently impassioned by the passion, that's a +10. The duration of a melancholy or madness affliction kind of depends on the level of the character's unmodified passions. So it could last hours or weeks, depending on whether you're unsung or exalted, which is pretty rough. So what are the passions that we have? Well, we have homage to Lord, fealty to Lord, loyalty to companions, loyalty to the king, hate, a person or a group, love for family, love for a person, adoration of a beloved, devotion of a deity, chivalry, hospitality, and station. There are 4 different groups of skills. We have combat, courtly, knightly, and woodcraft skills. The skills include awareness, battle, chirurgery, compose, courtesy, dancing, falconry, first aid, flirting, folklore, gaming, horsemanship, hunting, intrigue, literacy, orate, play instrument, recognize, religion, singing, and stewardship. Good knights aspire to become more than they are. Above all, they yearn for honor and glory. Honor measures the conduct and quality of player knights. It reveals the degree to which they uphold the values of feudal society. Glory speaks of the deeds player knights accomplish. It is the lens through which the world perceives them, the legacy they pass on to their children, and the path to immortality. Honor is the measure of a knight's integrity, decency, and morality. It is the basis for personal and social conduct, both necessary and virtuous. Honor is inborn and inherent in every noble. It is automatic, so deeply ingrained that it is almost unconscious. Every noble naturally assumes other nobles have honor until proven wrong. It is one's sense of self-worth and the respect that others give. It is the driving force behind all lords, knights, ladies, squires, and esquires. Honor sets nobility apart from all other classes. Churchmen do not need honor, for they are supposed to put the interests of God and the church before their own. Commoners do not need honor, for they have enough difficulty just staying alive. In order to gain honor, well, you got to do good things. You lose honor if you do bad things. Go figure. You can also lose honor through inaction, through shame, by killing a prisoner, and by other grievous actions. I really like that there may be times when a knight will need to defend their honor. This works just as a passion and can grant a bonus to a skill. The object of the game, though, is to obtain glory. Glory is the measure of fame accumulated for deeds done. Only nobles gain glory. Glory can increase, but never decrease. Bad behavior results in loss of honor, but not glory. In fact, successful bad behavior adds to glory just as surely as successful good behavior. Glory requires public acclamation. Deeds done in secret or that go unobserved and unannounced gain no glory. If a secret deed later becomes public knowledge, the character receives retroactive glory at the time of revelation. Let's be honest. You're a knight. You're gonna get into combat at some point. Each time personal combat is joined, both combatants simultaneously follow this procedure each round. First, you're going to declare your combat actions. Then you're going to resolve your combat actions. The winner is going to receive their outcome. The loser is going to receive their outcome. And then there's combat movement. Each character is limited to 1 combat action per round. Well, we have things like attack, call a squire, defend, disarm, evade, reckless attack, withhold damage, and zigzag. There's also dodge and set spear. You can control your mount, mounted charge, trample. You have barehanded attacks, escape, grapples, and slams. And all of these do different things and have their own rules, which are were rather complicated at best. Some of these actions can be used while mounted, some of them can be used unmounted, and some of them can be used for both. Winners get to roll a number of dice equal to their damage characteristic and modified by their weapon's type and grip. If you scored a critical success, you add 46 to the damage characteristic that round. Losers need to check for knockdown, dropped or broken weapons, and armor, shield, and or parry protection. There are many modifiers that can be applied in any given situation, such as facing multiple opponents. This is definitely one of those games where you're going to need a very good GM screen or a cheat sheet to keep things in check. A character is either healthy or debilitated. There seems to be no middle ground. Healthy individuals do not need care. The character is considered healthy even if not at full hit points. Knights are trained to live with minor injuries. The injuries of healthy individuals heal weakly at the healing rate. Even if an injured character is healthy, excessive strenuous activity causes aggravation, which is handled by incident, not by weak. Debilitated characters are incapable of taking care of themselves properly. They need rest, and activity is liable to worsen their condition, unless someone tends to them. This attention is called chirurgery, the unsophisticated medieval version of nursing. The debilitated box is checked when losing hit points below the unconscious characteristic, taking a major wound, taking a mortal wound and actually surviving it, which I would imagine is rare in medieval times, suffering a fumbled first aid roll, contracting an illness due to poor conditions or other sources. This includes poisoned characters. The debilitated box stays checked until the character receives at least one successful chirurgery roll and recovers at least half their total hit points. After that, the character status is considered healthy. A character passes out when their hit points are reduced to less than the unconscious characteristic value or when they sustain a major wound. A character at 0 or negative hit points for any reason or combination of reasons, disease, drowning, wounds, deterioration, etc., is on the verge of death. Shortly after the damage is inflicted, first aid may postpone death long enough for healing to take place. The character dies if not restored to positive hit points by midnight on the day they were wounded. Even if they survive, they will most definitely need chirurgery. Once a character is injured, recovery occurs with every passing week of game time. In all cases, conventionally, healing takes place on Sunday at noon. If injured characters insist on activity instead of resting, aggravation damage must be applied. Last but not least is the winter phase. What is presented here is but a simplified version of the standard rules found in the core rulebook, or so it says. To put simply, the winter phase is how you convert experience points into points for that specific value. In addition, knights can train and practice. They permanently gain glory and attain prestige awards for every 1,000 points of glory obtained. And here comes the obligatory spoiler warning. If you plan on playing through this adventure as a player, then turn back now. You have been warned. The Sword campaign serves as the introductory adventure for this box set. It continues off from the Adventure of the Sword and the Stone solo quest. Instead of playing as a page, you will actually play as a knight. One of the pre-generated ones, in fact. The Sword campaign is a collection of scenarios that plunge the player knights into the tumultuous early years of King Arthur's reign. From the drawing of the sword in the stone to the boy page's desperate fight against the northern kings who would steal his crown to the gifting of the most legendary sword in the world. Each scenario is intended to comprise the main adventure for that game year. Other events emerge through play. The first scenario actually takes place during the end of the solo quest where Arthur pulls the sword from the stone. Before that, the knights are able to explore a little bit of Londinium and engage in a little bit of the tournament that they are part of. This is a guided scenario, as to be expected since we already know the events that transpire, but what this actually does introduce us to is how battles work. It should be worth mentioning that this is the most important scenario in the entire campaign adventure because the choices you make can influence later NPCs, so tread carefully. After Arthur takes the sword from the stone, a group of loyalists begin making their pledges to Arthur. The player knights are tasked with guarding over Clarent, the Sword of Peace, and of course, someone would try to sneak in. In fact, a band of Picts rush in for the sword and it's up to the player knights to defend it. After repelling the attack, the player knights learn that Arthur intends to travel in full procession to the city of Carleon, where the Archbishop of Britain resides. When they get to Carleon, another full-scale battle commences. In the end, Arthur proves successful in the battle against Lot's army and forces the King of the North to withdraw. The conclusion of this scene is followed by the first winter phase, but don't worry, there's going to be more. The Adventure of the Force of the Silver Deer is the second scenario in the adventure and will take the player knights on an urgent mission to foreign courts as young King Arthur attempts to secure military support against King Lot, who is most likely to return with an even greater army. Here, the player knights are to travel to a variety of locations to help secure allies for Arthur. Each one has their own gift that the players are supposed to present to the king of that land. In the Glevum, the player knights secure these gifts: a golden jewel encrusted goblet for Nym, and an illuminated gilded Bible for Leodegrance. Count Sanum's gift is a fine bit and bridle of silver and tooled leather. It is in the Castle of Salt where problems begin to arise. The king is greedy and demands the other gifts in addition to his own. Unfortunately, there is really no way around this, it just straight up happens. Next, the players travel through Arden Forest and can be ambushed by Picts if they are not careful. The player knights arrive at the Carahaes castle to seek an audience with Leodegrance, but the king does not have time for them. The player knights can instead entertain the knights of the court with stories of their mighty deeds. If they roll well enough, the king will come out to listen and tell them where they are to go next. That's pretty much it. The player knights enter the Forest of the Silver Deer in order to reach the castle of the Dove Field, but they are unable to meet with the king and left to relay the message to the castle seneschal. When the player knights do go back to Carleon, they must prepare for battle. In the end, Arthur is once again victorious, with or without the player knights' help, by the way. The Adventure of the Broken Sword is the third and final scenario of the campaign. In it, the player knights hear of a strange knight who challenges others in deadly jousts. The knight in question is none other than Sir Pellinore, the king of Gomereth in Cambria, and he is cursed to this task. If a player knight manages to defeat him in one-on-one combat, though, then they acquire his curse instead. Regardless, the next morning, King Arthur is absent with Merlin. He has challenged the curse bearer to single combat and lost. The sword of peace is broken. Merlin tells the player knights of the sword in the lake, and it is up to the player knights to defeat the Nucleavi so that Arthur may claim this enchanted sword. The sword is none other than Excalibur, and once it is claimed, Arthur manages to break the curse that has befallen King Pellinore. Thus ends the campaign. So, here we are. My final thoughts. I think the one thing I can definitively say is that I don't really like this. I like the components and I like its presentation and all of that, but I don't think I really care for the system overall. There's just too many variables that seem to do something similar, if not the same thing. That would be skills, talents, and passions. The adventure is a little too linear for me. As in, there are way too many scenes in which the players don't have any say of anything. It's just them entering a scene and then the GM describing what's happening, and the players really don't have a lot of input as to how the story plays out. It's going to happen the way it's supposed to happen no matter what. Things just happen and the player knights are just kind of there. Take the scenario where the player knights have to deliver the gifts to the other kings. The very first king straight up takes up all of the gifts. There's no roll, you can't try to get them back or anything like that. It's just going to happen and they're left with nothing. The second king is goaded out by stories from the other player knights, and that's its whole thing. And the third king doesn't even meet them. They have to actually tell the person who's there watching over the castle what's happening and hope for the best. There really isn't much choice in this adventure. It feels more like a solo quest, but with a party of player knights. Then there's the solo quest itself. It's meant to introduce players and GMs to the mechanics of the game, but the most important thing that I feel like is missing from it is the why. Why are you rolling for these things? It would have been nice to have an explanation that, now you're in this situation, so you need to make this type of a roll. The parts that actually teach the player how to play the game and why. There really isn't any reason to go through it, honestly. I mean, the third book kind of starts with a recap of what's happened, or actually you play through what has happened at the end of that solo quest in that third book as the first scenario. I've heard overall that fans of previous Pendragon editions are quite unhappy with the core rulebook. And unfortunately, I can't really compare what's been done in the past to this new edition. I only have experience in this 6th edition. And even then, it's the starter set. It's not actually the full core rulebook. The starter set has really kind of deterred me away from wanting to actually delve into Pendragon as a role-playing game. The types of adventures that you're likely to go through in Pendragon are linear in some aspects, as in you're always going to be playing as a good knight who's trying to do good things for his king. And while I know there's bound to be some sort of fantastical nature to this world, we didn't really see that a whole lot here, with the exception of that one scenario with the sword in the lake and the player knights actually having to defeat a monster, or a creature, I guess, there, a fairy creature. If you're looking for something a little bit more tame, then this might be for you, but the rules really do take getting used to, unless you've already delved into Chaosium's basic role-playing system. Anyways, that's going to do it for this review. Feel free to leave a comment down below. Give this video a huge thumbs up to support the series, and I will see you guys in the next video.